My name is Patrick Barkham. I'm natural history writer for The Guardian. Welcome to this Guardian Live event. This is the event I've been really looking forward to beyond all others this summer. It's a conversation with young writers and activists, Dara McAnulty and Bella Lack, who have both written brilliant books, more of which later. We'll catch up on their campaigning, and we'll look at the overall framework for this evening, I suppose, is to look at this age of eco-anxiety and what we can do, to help the planet, and what we can do not to be consumed by the anxiety, to get acting and to help our fellow species and our only home. Please do. This event is more about you than me. I'm going to be asking questions for about the next 40 minutes in conversation with Dara and Bella, but we'd love to hear your questions. You can send them in on the chat feature, and I will get through absolutely as many as we can. Please do say your name and perhaps where you're watching from, and you could tell us your age as well if you're a younger person, because I'd love to have some questions from children and young people, just because they're often the best and most pertinent questions. So please do send in questions or even comments, and we'll get through as many as we can in the last 20 minutes of tonight's hour. So I first encountered Bella Lack a couple of years ago when she wrote one of the manifestos for Chris Peckham's People's Manifesto for Wildlife, and I was stunned by her eloquence and her incisiveness. And she's now written a brilliant book, Children of the Anthropocene. Here it is. It's just been published this spring, and she gives voice to young people, young activists, although she doesn't like the word activism, more of which later, from around the world, and addresses all the big 7 issues really confronting the planet, and finds out what we are already doing about them, and how people are getting active, and how it matters, and how they and you can help. And there's lots of really great practical ideas at the end of each chapter for getting involved and for ameliorating our own impact on the planet. Dara McAnulty probably needs no introduction to many of you. He is the youngest ever winner of the Wainwright Prize for Diary of a Young Naturalist, a luminously transformative book about Dara's own encounters with the natural world around his home in Northern Ireland. And that was 2 years ago, and I had the pleasure of meeting you, Dara, didn't I? Just before your book was published, and I did an interview in The Guardian, and ever since then it's been a roller coaster ride, hopefully with more ups and downs for you and both your activism and advocacy for nature, and also your writing, because Dara is now the author of 2 books, and this is his second, Wild Child, here, which is a beautiful illustrated picture book for younger people, which combines his poetic brilliance with lovely non-fiction and some surprising facts. So I learned, the best fact that I learned from this was that you can fit 64 wrens in a bird box together. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're gonna chat about your books and about your activism and obviously the bigger issues. But could I ask you both, first of all, just to start off, this is a lovely time of year. Thank you for all those who've joined us. You're probably joining us in the heat wave and coming in from the outdoors. But Dara and Bella, what have been your favorite kind of nature experiences of the past week or so? What have you been enjoying out there in midsummer? Dara?
So for the past week, I've been in Wales, and I've got to say, whenever from Northern Ireland, and whenever I see a raptor, so like a buzzard or a red kite, I get really, really excited. And then and especially red kites, because they're a bird that was really important to me. It was the bird that started my passion for helping to protect nature. It was the bird that I was frantically Googling up how to save it when I was in primary school. And then I went to Wales, and there's so many of them. It was incredible. We were just sort of walking around, and then there'd be like 5 red kites just wheeling around, and I probably wouldn't be able to see 5 in like a few weeks here. And then there were so, I probably saw over 50 red kites while I was in Wales, and it was magical. And there was loads of buzzards as well, and it was incredible because I had never really been exposed to that quantity of raptors before. It was always that one thing you see out your window. It's like a unicorn flying across the sky, and you go, and being able to see so many of them was honestly really quite hopeful, because they were extinct. They came back by a reintroduction project into Wales, and there's a reintroduction project in Northern Ireland at the moment, which is why they're back here, and it gave me real hope that that project can succeed as well.
Lovely experience. Bella, how about you?
So until about 3 weeks ago, I was stuck inside for probably the last 5 months revising for my A-level exams, as was Dara. So suddenly, I mean, I've appreciated nature since I was, for as long as I can remember, but suddenly when you have that period of time indoors, as everyone knows, after lockdown, although many of us actually spent most of it outdoors in gardens or parks, suddenly being outside has you have this new appreciation for it. And so before, whilst I would look out for barn owls, pipistrelle bats, what I took a lot of appreciation for when I went to my uncle's house in Sussex about a week ago was he has this area of completely untamed, untrimmed wildflower meadow, and just walking through this little path that he's cut to see, the peacock butterflies, to see the common blue butterflies and things that you really take for granted, but I really hadn't appreciated for such a long time. I think that was one of the best experiences.
Lovely. I remember it well, and it's so cruel to have exam season in May and June, the two best months of the year, the most beautiful months of the year, and you're kind of out the other side now, aren't you? Hopefully, I know you've got university exam seasons to come, I guess, but yeah, you're kind of hopefully through the worst. I always think A levels is probably the worst. Bella, if I could start with talking to you a little bit about Children of the Anthropocene. I was very struck by its ambition and the global scope of the book, and you really do, you take readers through all the big issues. So it's a tour of overconsumption, transport, farming, water, our disconnect from nature, women in environmentalism, and intersectionality or diversity. And I was struck really with your wisdom as well as your incisiveness and the fascinating portraits of young activists from around the planet. But of political crises, you said sometimes as the government's capabilities diminish, citizens expand to fill that space. And I wondered if it feels clear to me that we're living through a time of sort of unprecedented political crises. I mean, Western democracies really aren't functioning effectively anymore. And do you feel that that's the case here in Britain at the moment? Do you feel that grassroots, that people, that citizens are starting to fill that vacuum when it comes to environmental policy making?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our government has been incredibly apathetic environmentally. We're very good at, during the Amazon, when there were wildfires in the Amazon, in California and Australia, we're very good at kind of posting, and our government and individuals actually on a systemic and individual level, highlighting what other countries are doing wrong, how Africa must protect, elephants and rhino. And when it comes to our own wildlife, we have incredibly large swathes of just ecologically impoverished areas. And I think it's really important that we do bring that focus, that environmental focus, back to ourselves, as well as, maintaining that global focus. So I tried to do that in the book, and I had this switch between local young people and then global young people, because I think it's really important. It's very easy for us to think of the environmental crisis as some intangible future for future generations to deal with, but also something which is going to affect people in just different areas of the world. And although it is distributed disproportionately, it's important that we remember everyone is going to be affected in different ways. Yeah.
No, I got that impression very clearly from the book, and you did move really neatly between some of the challenges in in developing countries and then the challenges back home. Do you see are there some hopeful examples, just keeping it within Britain for now? Are there other sort of grassroots movements that you've spotted that you think of as being as sort of stepping in where the government's failing at the moment?
Yeah, so one of the young people I spoke to is Harvey Tweets and his friend Tom Whitehurst, who have this initiative called Celtic Reptiles and Amphibians. And what they're doing is they're focusing on rewilding reptiles and amphibians. And rewilding is probably a concept which most people have heard of, maybe kind of superficially, but it's something which I think provides so much excitement for the conservation and environmental movement, because so often we're railing against the system, we're saying what we don't want, and suddenly rewilding provides this alternative future where we have cities, that are brimming with wildlife rather than wildlife condemned to these fragmented pockets, and where our countryside is brimming with wildlife once again. And so what Harvey and Tom are doing, they're breeding functionally extinct reptiles and amphibians. And although that isn't rewilding per se, just introducing a species, because rewilding is a much more kind of holistic ecosystem approach, they're taking that one aspect of it, they're focusing on that, and they're doing huge amounts of things for education. People go and visit their centre. And also they're doing this whilst campaigning and doing their A-levels as well, being 17 and 18. So that's something which I think is on a local scale right now. And it's also many other areas of the UK like Knepp, which people have probably heard of in Sussex, but which the government, if they focused on, and if we had something like the NHS for nature, like the National Nature Service, where they invested money in a specific unit which focused on rewilding, for example, that could be an incredible step forward for British conservation.
I went to a conservation conference a couple of years ago, and it was about rewilding, and it had rewilding in the title. And usually when I go to conservation conferences, everyone in the room is at least 50, if not older. And at this conference that was about rewilding, it was full of young ecologists in their 20s. And I wondered, do you experience this? Perhaps this is a question for both of you. Do you feel amongst your peers, your fellow 18, 19-year-olds, do you feel that rewilding has particular traction? Bella, you go first.
It's definitely increased in the last few years. I would say still when I go to spaces which are focused on rewilding, it is not exclusively, but it's majorly older people. Heel Rewilding, which was created about 2-3 years ago, and another initiative in the UK, is led all by young people. And I think the thing that rewilding has is that so there's a thing called shifting baseline syndrome, which is that young people don't know exactly how much nature we're actually missing out on. So for example, my dad tells me stories of how he used to drive along at night and they had to stop frequently because the insects would bombard the windscreen of the cars because there were so many insects. And I've driven at night many times, not myself, I can't drive, but I've just been there and never had to stop to wipe the windscreens. And I wish I did, because it would signify just how diverse our biodiversity is and how abundant it is. Anyway, a bit of a tangent, but that's shifting baseline syndrome. Young people don't know what they're missing out on, and rewilding could help young people imagine this different future where we have so much more wildlife, and it changes conservation from something a bit dull and boring to something really exciting.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a forward-looking thing, and it's about creating new things and not just defending the little things we've got left, I guess. Dara, do you feel that rewilding is a kind of really positive force amongst younger environmental?
Yeah, and as Bella was saying about like the shifting baselines, me going to Wales and seeing all of those red kites is sort of an example of me not really fully understanding the sheer quantity that we have lost. And I think young people particularly like rewilding maybe a little bit more than some other strategies, because it's something tangible, it's something that they can see happen. And I think it's a way that you can practically apply ecology in a way that you can see without having to. I think a lot of the time we crumble down to these, like we've got very defensive, as you said, like scrambling over these last patches that we have left, instead of trying to create new ones with the environment that we currently are in. Because as we rewild, it's rewilding back into a place which is fundamentally different to how it was maybe 30, 40 years ago. And so if you look at NEP, the rewilding was actually done at different stages. They had to, because they got more money and more land, and as they rewilded, they noticed that on different years, whenever they started rewilding, it had very different results, just depending on like the local conditions and how many different branching pathways the rewilding took, which is like as it filled out all of the niches of that environment and the habitat. And I think it's really quite exciting because it shows that nature is both resilient, I think, because if you allow the nature to have the space, it can come back. And that gives a hopeful message, which really does help with eco-anxiety, because I found that anxiety as a whole comes from a main source. As a person who's dealt with anxiety most of their life, it comes from things that you cannot control. That is the main source of anxiety. I cannot control the fossil fuel industry on a global scale. It's something that's so massive. Every time you attempt to think about it, your mind is just going to go down rabbit holes, and anxiety, doubt, and fear creeps in. But rewilding, you think, I can do that. I can do that in my garden. I can do that in a small patch. I can do that anywhere I want. It's something that I can look at. It's something I can see. It's something I can touch. It's something I can control in a sense. Of course, and I think being able to focus on that really helps with anxiety as well, which a lot of young people are really struggling with at the moment.
Definitely. Bella, just on that subject of what we can control and what we can't control, I thought your chapter on food and farming was brilliant, and there were some fascinating examples. You wrote of a farm I hadn't actually heard of in Normandy, where using permaculture principles, they grow nearly 1,000 different types of crops and foods as an antidote to the incredible narrowness of industrial agriculture. But I was interested and surprised, actually, because I think you're vegan yourself, aren't you? But you weren't prescribing veganism for everyone, and there was this lovely quote from you here. The world we need is going to be a messy, diverse patchwork of solutions that differ in every community and culture. Could you just tell me a little bit about your kind of conclusions there with regards to veganism, and perhaps allowing for a diversity of different local responses to how we grow our own food?
Yeah. Firstly, I'm not vegan, I'm vegetarian, just to clear that up. But also, I think the whole thing about diversity is that coming from a place of kind of strict rigidity and activism, you're never going to convince people to listen to you. And we have to recognize that this is a spectrum and a journey. And although we need large-scale systemic change, and we need it very, very rapidly, surely it's better to make some progress rather than completely turning people away from the cause. And I think some of the places that we've already mentioned, like NEP, is making huge environmental leaps. But also, if you speak to Isabella Tree, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she's anti-veganism because of some of her policies use grazing animals for that rewilding and conservation benefit. And, you know, that works there. And I think what we need to recognize is that whilst some people in their journey to sustainability, veganism will work for them because it does have a huge impact on your personal carbon emissions. For other people, other types of diets, reducing meat, flexitarian might work better. So everyone, you know, needs to be making these strides. But I don't think there should be a prescription of exactly what you need to do and when you need to do it. And yeah, the Farm de Bec Eloin, it's a French name, it's in Normandy, and they're using different permaculture techniques, and they're also using grazing cattle. And it was just the most incredible place I've ever been, to be honest. Before that, we went to a large scale industrial farm, a monoculture, and being in there and then being in this permaculture farm, just first of all, the emotional kind of the different feelings between being in a biodiverse area and being in a monoculture allows you to imagine what our future could be like, walking through the British countryside when it's not just this ecological wasteland, but actually it's brimming with wildlife. And that could be what our countryside could be like, because permaculture actually can provide a higher yield than monocultures. So it's just so exciting, and you kind of stand there and you think, why aren't we doing this already? It's such a simple solution, and it is going to feed our inevitably growing population as well.
It's so heartening, isn't it, when you meet farmers and land managers and growers who are taking positive steps like that, because they're making such a massive difference. I met an industrial farmer from Sussex last week who is completely transforming the way he farms and is rewilding his soil, to use his own words. And this is a big, powerful farmer who produces food for Hovis and Bird's Eyes, you know, and when you meet people like that making a difference, you really see there's great grounds for hope. Bella, just finally, before I move on to chat to Dara a bit more about Wild Child, I was very interested also in your, well, the whole book itself is brilliant, but I was particularly interested in your chapter on environmentalism and diversity at the end. Obviously, there's a plea for diversity in the crops we grow, but diversity within the people who make up the environmental movement, which has been shown in Britain to be virtually the whitest profession, I think, after the legal profession. Obviously, hopefully that's starting to change, but why do you see that? You make a very eloquent case in the book for this being important. Why could you explain why you feel that's so important that the environmental movement becomes a home for diversity, for people of colour, for people of different backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the logic of it, it's very simple that diversity of people is going to result in a diversity of solutions. And I think when you look right now, I'm just going to use for an example, youth environmental activists. It is a small demographic of very similar voices, particularly, you know, white Western activists, such as myself, saying the same things, and that's fine because we have the same message and it needs to be pressed. But you know, inevitably, when I come on to this panel and another panel, I'm going to say very similar things, and people aren't going to want to hear me again and again repeating that. And I think when I spoke to the young people in different parts of the world, you know, there are so many solutions which exist, and I would go as far as to say all the solutions that we need to fight the environmental crisis already exist all over the world. And what's actually stopping us is also, this isn't just a crisis of environmentalism, it's a crisis of communication, because those solutions aren't being amplified and they're not being heard. So I think if we are to get to the place that we need to be to fight the environmental crisis, the biggest change that we need to have right now is listening to the voices which have pre-existing solutions, amplifying them, uplifting them, and then implementing those changes on a global scale, because right now they might be in local communities in Nairobi, for example, having a great impact there. But then if we adopted that, if the British government adopted some of those solutions, that could have huge changes here as well.
Absolutely, as you say in your book, it's like handing the microphone over, isn't it? And not many people have a forward by Greta, but you've got that, and she makes that point too, which is an excellent one. Dara, do you feel that the environmental movement is becoming more diverse in the couple of years in which you've been a very high profile activist within it and a spokesperson, and you've really battled with raising kind of neurodiversity, haven't you? And do you see it changing? Is it changing fast enough?
Well, it's definitely changed from the 5 or so years ago when I started. It's radically different because back then, when we were thinking about especially youth activism, it was primarily the white Western voices, as Bella said, all saying the same thing in general. And it was getting very stale, I do think. And I do think one of the massive turning points for it were the school strikes. And I think it helped in a very specific way, because before that, there was activists all over the world. And there are a diverse amount of activists in the world. It's just that we struggle to communicate with each other. There was we're all over the world, and even in this great age of communication, it's still kind of tough. There's language barriers and all of that. But then the school strikes came along, and all of a sudden you have an international youth movement, which is uniting people of all different backgrounds, all across the world, of all different ethnicities, and of all different neurodiversity, people who are autistic, everybody. It was a great almost equalizer, because your voice is now among the many. And then that obviously spawned all of this communication between people all across, all of these activists across the world. And I think that was a massive turning point, because you could see it. All of a sudden, everybody was talking together. You can look at and everybody was talking about climate change, and everybody was talking about the issues of the world. And it showed that as an international community, it's so important, because it turns out there are a lot of young people out there in the world whenever they get together. And I think for me, it's about getting as many different people and as many people as possible, because there's 1,000 problems plaguing the world at the moment, and they all require 1,000 different. We've got many different solutions to find for those problems, and one type of mind, one type of person isn't going to be able to find a solution to all of those problems. You need all of those different types of people to be able to solve all the problems. Otherwise, it's trying to fit together a jigsaw, but you've only got one of the same piece. It just doesn't really work.
Yeah, that's beautifully put, Dara. Can I ask you about Wild Child now? We're actually book twins, because I've got a book called Wild Child.
I know.
My book's sort of aimed for parents, and yours is obviously very squarely aimed at children and young people. What made you decide that you wanted to? There's this lovely image of you kind of encouraging the young reader of this book, hold my hand, come for a walk in the woods, come and see what I see, or sit, let's look at some mini beasts together. And there's this lovely sense of you as a kind of older brother type figure guiding people through. But what inspired you to write it?
Well, I think it was memories, basically. Memories of what I was like as a child, exploring what I would have done if I was a child. I would have looked out of my window. I would have seen all the blackbirds. Then I would have went out into the garden and explored. Then I would have asked questions, and more questions would spring up. There's probably like a little bit where I'm off in the library for a few weeks. That cut from Wild Child, but then I would be going out further and further into the wilds that surrounded me, and it would be on this like snaking journey up the mountains down to the streams. And I wondered what it would be like to almost guide myself in a sense because I do sort of see myself as the child in the book a little bit. I'm almost like urging myself forward into it. And it was that idea that activism, which is a vague and not very useful word at times, but that it could be done through art, that it could be done through wonder, because it's always been my great thought, my idea that when we think about saving the world, big idea, it's a big massive task. Just go out and save the world, everybody. And I think about whenever we find the solutions for these problems, I'm going to say when, because I'm a hopeful, optimistic fool. Why did we solve those problems? And what would be the reason why we solved those problems? Was it because we feared the world ending? Or was it because of the wonder that we feel and the beauty and the majesty of that world? Because it's a beautiful world that we live in. And if we solve it because of fear, what happens when fear is gone? Any study of dictatorships will tell you that as soon as fear disappears, the people have a revolution and it all goes to craziness very, very quickly. And once you remove the pressure, it's like gas, it expands. But the world, if we save it because of wonder, when the problem disappears, the wonder is still there. The thing that keeps us vigilant, the thing that keeps us working towards a better future is still there because the world is beautiful and we protected it. And so I hope with books like Wild Child, I can get young people at that formative years of their childhood to fall in love with nature, to see that wonder, and then from that work to protect it. I think it's also a good way of trying to be hopeful and optimistic as well.
I think you sort of answered this in Wild Child yourself, Dara, in that you've if I may say so, you've got a poetic soul, and I think you almost say in Wild Child that children naturally have a poetic soul. It's what every child has, and that instinct to connect with our fellow species, and it happens if we only allow it, doesn't it? And I think you both actually, Bella, you write brilliantly about the disconnect from nature and why it happens and what we can do about it in childhood too. But I think you both really get that children, every child has it, don't they? But it's just giving them the opportunity, and that's what Wild Child is and does, and it's another doorway, isn't it? I wondered, Dara, what kind of feedback you'd had from readers so far. Have you had any interesting or nice comments from children?
It's been lovely. I'm going to be honest, it's been so heartwarming. My absolute favorite was a class of children who all drew pictures of Rosie, my dog, and sent them to me. And I was just like, ah! Because I'm in like each of the main spreads, like starting the section, Rosie is in there. It's
Rosie appears, doesn't she? Yeah.
She appears in every single opening section, and I made sure of that because I love my dog Rosie, and she's very cute, but she sleeps 18 hours a day. Wish I could do that.
And are you doing school events as well, Dara? Have you been going to school for this book?
I've been trying to do a few school events.
I mean, obviously you've been doing your A-levels as well, so there's a limit.
Yeah, I've been doing my I've been doing my A levels. I've been working on my eco group in my own school and trying to do some school events. It's been quite hard currently, but hopefully I'll be able to do some maybe later on. I've got Book of Birds, a sort of sequel to Wild Child. I'll hopefully be able to do some school events for that. Just being able to spread the wonder of the natural world would be amazing.
And when's your Book of Birds coming out?
September, right in the middle of when I start uni.
Oh,
amazing.
Yeah. That's not great timing, is it?
Well.
Both of you, we're getting questions coming in from the audience. I'm going to move to those in a minute, and just to say to everyone watching and listening, please do send in questions and tell us who you are. If don't be shy. Give us a name if you can, and tell us your age if you think it's relevant. It could be 83 or 8, and we'll get through loads of those questions. But I wanted to ask a question on behalf of, well, me really, and it's my daughter Esme is 10, and she adores nature. She's totally got that wonder, Dara, and she's desperate to help and save the planet, and she's very anxious about it. And I just feel, as a parent, I keep hearing George Monbiot's words that as an activist, environmental activist, you have to get used to many more defeats than victories. You know, the victories are the kind of 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or whatever. And I'm just desperate that she doesn't get involved in a load of environmental defeats that sort of crush her spirit. What would you recommend? What would you say to a young person desperate to help? Where should they start? Where do you begin? Bella, sorry, Dara, could I just start with Bella first, and then I'll come to you.
I would say to young people, begin finding your why. And I said this at the end of the book, because, you know, activism, or whatever we're going to call it, the environmental movement needs to be a marathon, not a sprint. And I think Dara talked about Dara talked about kind of the bad negative connotations of activism a bit, or why you don't like the word activism. And I think, you know, it is a very narrow definition when we think of an activist, someone maybe toting a sign, placard, speaking in the street, protesting. And I think what young people need to remember getting involved is that you don't have to be passionate about protesting outside Parliament in order to make change. Find your own passion. Is that cooking? Could you focus on, you know, how you can help your friends, your community? Maybe in your school, you could speak to the cooks in your school about having a more plant-based diet. Do you like gardening, rewilding? You can focus on your own garden or a local community allotment or park or something like that. Speak to the local council, how you could change it from just a stretch of grass to something wilder, introduce wildflower meadows, a pond, something like that. And I think, so the first thing I would say is for young people, find your passion, your why, and a niche. Because one of the biggest things is how overwhelming this all is. And it is about control, as we've spoken about. So one of the best ways that one of the best things you can do to keep yourself controlled in your focus is focus on a niche. Educate yourself about as much as you can. Don't limit your knowledge, but then channel that action into something direct, which will have a measurable impact. So you can look back and say, okay, I have progressed and I've made this amount of change and I am moving forward. And the last thing I would say to young people is it's so easy when reports like the IPCC come out and you see these terrifying headlines plastered over social media, just a few snippets usually, because that's what social media allows. It's so easy to become terrified. And that's normal, of course, when they say we have 12 years left to prevent catastrophic climate change. But there's a great quote by Mary Hegler, who's a climate activist, and she says, don't be overwhelmed by the complexity of the problem, but fall in love with the creativity of the solution. And I think that's something incredible for young people to focus on, which is that, yes, this is about sacrifice, because, you know, we've been handed a bit of a poison chalice of a planet and we are going to have to make sacrifices. And many of us go through hardships in order to get to the place where we need to be, but also now it's our opportunity, which no other generation in history has had, to be on the right side of history and actually see this transformation of society for the better, which is something so exciting. And, you know, young people are good at being creative and innovative and idealistic, and this is our chance to use all those traits for good.
Thank you, Bella. Dara, what would you say to young activists or young people who want to act and help the environment and the planet?
Wow, Bella basically covered most of it there. Oh, very eloquently. That was quite comprehensive, honestly. The only thing I could add is that one of the ways that I found that people can make change is through helping to change what I like to think of as the mood, because this is a surprisingly important thing for groups of people, is to change a mood from one of apathy into one of action. And usually this happens really slowly by the implantation of ideas and cultural progress in a way, but it's more just change, cultural change. And this comes through art, essentially. It comes through people speaking, it comes through ideas, and it comes through the writers, it comes through the artists, it comes through the musicians. And these all create a sort of vibe of a people. And the more art that we create that is going to help us change the world in a sense, makes it a lot easier for society to change the world. If you look at the 70s, you have punk, you have a lot of punk poetry, you have a lot of rebellious writing. What do you get? You have the miners' strikes, you have radical action, you have in Northern Ireland, the Northern Ireland civil rights movement. You have a lot of action going on because of the art that surrounds it. And it changed the mood of around these issues. The same thing can sort of happen here. And so I encourage a lot of young people that if you don't know what to do, you can talk about things with your friends. It's a surprisingly effective thing, because word of mouth is the most powerful instrument of communicating information. It jumps from person to person, and the mood changes. It jumps out of your echo chambers. It can actually change the world in a sense. And it's very surprising how it happens. Us humans, we tend to cop on to things quite quickly. And as I said, with the climate strikes, you see a definite point after that when the mood has changed. We're now more available to doing situations. And then obviously that transfers into people voting out the people who are, it's why democracy tends. Democracy is a system that works slowly, which isn't very beneficial for the problems that we're having. But eventually it tends to kick. Obviously, we need to speed that up a little bit with a bit of a shock therapy. But in the end, just loving nature and talking about that love with the people who you know, and then getting them to love nature is enough. It is something that you can do, and it's something that any of us can do. And it's quite simple, but please just talk. That's my advice.
That's lovely, Dara. That's a brilliant answer, and thank you, because your appeal for the relevance of art and creative work in that too is very telling. Questions. We must move on to all the questions that are coming in. Kieran, aged 11, asks, is there anyone who you look up to or who inspires you? Dara first.
Okay, he's gonna hate me for saying this, but I definitely looked up to Chris Peckham for a long time, being an autistic naturalist, one who was into punk like I was. And someone who definitely had a like that same urgency and the same love for the natural world as I did. And watching him like on Spring Watch, he made a massive difference on me. And he's also a really nice guy. So I think he definitely inspired me to keep on going. But I think nature sort of inspired me as well. That's horribly.
Good answer. Bella?
When I was very young, I remember leafing through National Geographic and reading articles about Jane Goodall. And I think, like Dara relating to Chris Peckham, I kind of related to her, the beginning of her story when she had this just fierce determination to do something. For her, it was obviously chimpanzees. I began because I began environmentalism and activism when I was 11, 12 because of orangutans and palm oil. And that was the issue which kind of got me onto social media learning about environmentalism. And also, it was at a time, you know, Jane Goodall began her science and her conservation at a time when many other scientists were saying, firstly, you're not going to be able to go out to Africa and do this yourself because you're too young, because you're a woman, because you're not a scientist, and you're too emotional to do this. She did it and, you know, had an incredible impact on the scientific community and on redefining humans, really, because of what she discovered with chimp behavior and how similar they are to us. So yeah, I was incredibly inspired by Jane Goodall, and also when I was speaking to the young people for the book, by all of them, and by all those people who I can't name because I don't know them, but who are just doing grassroots projects, you know, in communities, in Indigenous communities, especially around the world, because I think those are the places where there are solutions that exist, which could be so impactful on society, and we need to find them and hear them.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much going on actually that doesn't get reported by the mainstream media. And I speak as a mainstream media journalist, and we try, but we don't get around them all. And there's so much good stuff happening, isn't there, at grassroots all over. We've got lots more questions, so I'm going to try and get through as many as we can. This is a lovely question and comment from the person hasn't left their name, but says to both of you, you have achieved so much so young. What are your aspirations for the future? And do you have a most memorable moment so far in your campaigning? Thanks for everything you are both doing. So aspirations for the future, memorable moment. Bella?
I hope to do journalism, and I just love kind of asking questions and exploring things, and I'd love to do investigative journalism, focusing on the environment. But also what I learned in the last year or so is how intersectional environmentalism is, and I would kind of like to explore that. And my favorite moment, or a standout moment, I think, just to connect it to the last thing I said with Jane Goodall, was when, was it 29? I think it was 2019 or the beginning of 2020, just before lockdown. I had the opportunity to meet her in Paris, and I remember her walking down the hallway, and you know, normally you're starstruck by kind of singers or, I don't know, models or whatever. And I remember her walking down, and I've never been lost for words, but I had nothing to say, and I had so many questions planned. But I was just standing there kind of spluttering because I was so in awe of her. So that was a pretty good moment. Yeah.
That's lovely. Dara?
So I think
aspirations for the future and most memorable moment.
So aspirations for the future. Now this is where I get a bit confused because my thoughts of the future are very strange, because I generally don't go in with too much of a plan after uni. Like I want to go to university and I want to study biology, natural sciences, and then I don't really know. All my life I've sort of planned on getting to university, like since I was a kid in primary school, getting bored in maths classes because it wasn't hard enough. I've always wanted to go to university, and now I'm nearly there. It's kind of scary, honestly. But I'll probably become a scientist. I'll go into some field of biology, might write some more, might get into a bit more activism, and I'll sort of work it out from there. Hopefully I can make a little bit more change in the world. I'll definitely continue writing some more, but I've honestly got no real idea. But my favorite moment, I can definitely say this, and the moment where I saw a lot of change was a moment in, it's actually a picture inside my first book, Diary of a Young Naturalist, at the school strikes. And I was thinking about during our conversations about that day, where I don't live in Belfast, and we'd all come over, basically. We'd all gathered in Belfast. And I remember my school had decided, we'd found a loophole, because the education authority said you're not allowed to go on school strike. But we discovered that the Amnesty International group in our school could allow it as technically as a school trip. So we managed to get out about half the school out of school. There was basically nobody in school for that entire day, and we all went up to Belfast. And it was amazing just to have all of your classmates behind you and everybody screaming for a better future, along with all of these people, all of these different schools who had done basically the same thing. And it was incredible. I had never seen really anything like it, all these young people coming together in one place at one time for something that we all cared about. And I think that was a massive moment for me that really showed hope and that we can make a bit of difference. And
tactical cunning as well, Dara, that you were able to work out a way of doing it. Well done.
Yeah, it was rather funny as we all marched out of school.
There's some great questions coming in, with questions from Canada and Germany, but there's one here. I'm Nick, 63, and a member of a newly formed village environmental group. What's the best way to engage with younger people of our village, population 3,000, as there is no representation currently from anyone under 50? Dara, what do you think? What's the best way for 63-year-old Nick to get some young people into his village environmental group?
So I think the first thing is, so the difficulty is that there's already a little bit of a barrier here, is that there's nobody under 50 already. And young people tend to, there's like almost this barrier around 40 of where people like in their 30s and 20s struggle to get into groups with people over like 50. I don't know what causes it, but it is a thing that exists. I've sort of, through pure willpower, tried to force myself into groups of older people, of wizened environmentalists. So I think the best way is probably to create days where it's for young people. Honestly, organize stuff that young people like. I don't know, discos, literally, and then getting young people into the natural world, organizing nature walks, getting them outside, get like maybe one person from your village group, an expert, and do something with just the younger people. And then as they get to know more of the older people, it tends to get easier. Because honestly,
but it's initially a barrier, isn't it? Yeah,
it's initially a barrier because older people are kind of scary. And
Bella, sorry, Dara, to cut you off. We're time is running short. Bella, what would be your advice for?
I think part of the problem could also be kind of this imposed silo of how do I get young people involved. And I think young people want to be taken seriously, and often, you know, many of the young people I've spoken to know a lot more than many of the politicians I've spoken to about the environmental crisis. So I would say almost get rid of this. Let's do. For example, I know some people I've spoken to have said, okay, we're going to make TikToks and kind of simplify this information down to engage young people. I would say, you know, keep whatever you're doing, but just bring the young people to where you are, to those decision-making spaces, because I think the majority of young environmentalists are fully capable of being sat at that decision-making table and saying, this is what the problem is, and this is the change that we want to see. So if you already have, you know, an existing, the village environmental group, then invite young people there, and I'm sure there will be many who will be willing to engage with it.
Thank you. This next question, a warm hello from southern Germany. I'm Lara, a 22-year-old biologist in training. My question for both of you, what is your favorite species of bird? Dara. One word answer.
Okay, this is tricky, but I've got to say hen harrier. I'm going to be consistent. It usually changes day on day, but I've settled on hen harrier because it is just a beautiful bird. If any of you haven't seen them, just look a picture of them up on the internet. I remember I was in a wood, Big Dog Wood, and I just saw one rise out of the forest, and it is right up there with the most magical experience of my life, just sitting, gazing up from a lake and just seeing it sort of hover out of the trees. And it's a moment, it's one of those like key memories that you have that's sort of emblazoned on your mind forever. So it's my favorite bird. The red kite comes in close second.
Lovely. Bella.
I would say barn owl, because I just had a few years ago the most incredible experience of a barn owl just probably a meter away, kind of gliding down silently, you know, that ghost-like glide that they do over my head. And I don't know, something about that moment just, yeah, like Dara's hen harrier, emblazoned them into a top position for me.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to try and squeeze in a final question. We do have to end at 9 o'clock, but France Gagnon from the Musée de la Civilisation in Quebec, Canada. Sorry, I'm stumbling to get that out. It's lovely to have people from all over the world joining us. How do you think the arts can help and be a part of overcoming eco-anxiety for young people and helping everyone move forwards in the best way possible? Bella.
Stories and storytelling, because stories are the cornerstone of our civilization, of humanity. We often think, you know, that they should be relegated to nurseries or kind of curling up by a fire reading about mystical creatures and dragons. But I think, you know, in the next few years, we need to make storytelling the key form of communication in the environmental movement, because right now it's so ostracizing. Scientists churning out, you know, this incredible data and this incredible science, but even many environmentalists are never going to sit down and read the whole IPCC report, let alone people who aren't even engaged in the environmental crisis. So in terms of arts, painting, writing, singing, educate yourself about the environmental movement, and then get that kind of information together and make it into a narrative which is going to be conveyed easily to people.
Thank you, Bella. Dara.
Yeah, it's the best way. It's the way that humans have communicated with important ideas with each other for years, because stories and the arts have been our way of getting very complex ideas and breaking them down into a way that our brains can somehow manage. And it becomes a very powerful thing. A book can change someone's life. I've always had the opinion that every time you read something, every time you take in a new little piece of information from the arts, your perspective of the world shifts a little, because you have more information now to make decisions. And I think that once we have and the best way of getting an information to someone's mind is through a painting, a piece of music, a song, a book. And through all of that coming into your mind, we can now it would make us easier for us to make decisions about the world that we're facing. And so I think arts has the power to change how we see the world. It has the power to then, through that, change the world. And it also can make you happy. Like, quite simply, it can give you that moral support to just let you keep on going, because it's quite a devastating world that we live in. It's a troublesome thing. It seems to writhe and contort its way, and you never seem to be able to predict what's going on. And that can be quite depressing and demoralizing. But just having a good story, a good book, something that gives you the optimism and the hope to keep on going that next day, and realizing the beauty that surrounds you, but also the idea that we have to keep on going one step forward into this world, or else we will never make it out. And stories give us the internal power, the ability to keep us going, to keep that step going, that one step further. And in doing that, it collectively forces us all into making action. And so that's why I think art is important. It's important for every aspect of human culture, because it is culture, essentially. And obviously, culture is the thing that motivates us to do the things that we do. And so if we don't change the motivation, then we're not going to do anything, are we?
Dara, thank you. On the note of books and storytelling changing the way we see the world, here are Dara and Bella's brilliant books, available from all good bookshops. That is all we've got time for, unfortunately. I will be told off for allowing the event to run over, but just to say thank you both so much for joining us. I could listen to you both talk all evening, to be honest. You're both so eloquent and inspiring and poetic and interesting and galvanizing, and regardless of how old you are, the fact that you're both waiting for your A-level results is even more extraordinary. And to have both written such brilliant books at your age, as well as achieve so much in the world of environmental activism, is incredible. And hats off to you both. There are more Guardian Live events coming up for those of you watching and listening at home, so please do check out the list. I believe there's a good one coming up on another climate event discussing how to stop fossil fuel giants. Also, please do let us know what you thought of tonight's event. There's feedback forms available, so please do let us know, and we'll try and program more events like these. Dara, Bella, thanks ever so much for your time. Very best of luck with your A-levels, and thank you everyone for watching this Guardian Live event and listening to Dara and Bella. I'm Patrick Barkham. I'll say good night to you all. Thank you and good night.